In the last movie, we saw how to install Ruby, but there's one more component of that we need to install, which is the DevKit. Let's see how to do that. You can find out more information about DevKit and how to install it by going to github.com/oneclickRubyInstaller. That's the repository for the Ruby installer. And then on their wiki, under Development Kit, you can find out information. And it explains to you what DevKit is. It's a toolkit that makes it easy to build and use native C and C++ extensions for Ruby on Windows. So simply put, it means that when we start downloading RubyGems and it wants to compile those into native C extensions that we can use, that way they'll be optimized for speed, then we're going to need DevKit. We're going to need the compilers and things that come inside DevKit. So that's why we need to add it. And the way that we get that is from the Ruby installer. So we'll switch back to the Ruby installer website, rubyinstaller.org. We'll go to Download, and you'll see that underneath the Ruby installers that we installed already, if we scroll down, you'll see that there's 3 development kits here that we can download. There may be more or less at different points in time in the future. And to determine which one, it depends on which version of Ruby we installed. You can see up here, it talks about which development kit, and it says that the correct one to download is the one that matches the version of Ruby we downloaded. For me, that was Ruby 2.0 with x64. So if that's the version I picked, then I need to pick this version of the DevKit. If you downloaded something different, you'll want to get one that matches for you. So I'm going to come down here to the DevKits, and here's the one that matches for mine. I'll click on that. It'll come up and ask me if I want to save the file. I'll say yes. And then Firefox will proceed to download it. When it's done, we can just click on this folder, and it will open up our downloads folder where we can see it, and then we can just run it. It says, would you like to run it? We'll say yes, that's okay. Where would you like to extract it to? Now this is a very important choice because by default, it's going to extract all of these files into my downloads directory, and that's not what I want. I want to change this so that instead it simply says DevKit with a capital D and a capital K, no spaces. So that's where I'm going to put it. So I'll hit extract, and it will create that folder for me and extract all of these files into there. Once the extraction is done, you can close your downloads folder. The steps that we're going to follow to install are actually listed here on the wiki. So you can scroll down and you can find those in case they change in the future. But we've already extracted the files. What we're starting with now is these steps here. And I'm going to walk you through those, but I just wanted you to see that they are there on the wiki as well. So in order to run these, what we're going to do is we're going to open up our command prompt. We're going to change directories into that root directory DevKit that we just created. Oops, let me try that again. /DevKit. There we are. Now that I'm in that directory, if I do dir, we can see the listing of what's in there. Now what we need to do is type a couple of commands to get things configured properly. So ruby space dk.rb init. So space and then init, and then that will generate a config.yml file for us. We can take a look at that again with dir. We can see that that file is right here, config.yml. That's a YAML file. And so what we're going to do is type, the actual word type, type, space, config.yml, and you'll see what Ruby versions it found for us. So that's what's here. If we wanted additional Rubies, then we would list those as well. But it found our Ruby version, so that's okay. That's what we wanted it to do. Now we just type ruby dk.rb install. Before we typed init, now we're going to type install, and that will install DevKit to enhance our installed version of Ruby. The way that we can test whether this worked correctly and whether we have the necessary extra code that we're going to need to build these gems is to try one. So install, when we'll try JSON gem -- platform equals Ruby. And JSON should install for us. And you should see it come up in the messages and say with native extensions while it's installing. So there it is, temporarily enhancing path to include DevKit, building native extensions. That's the key part that we wanted to see. And as the wiki notes, we can actually try out using that gem by using ruby-rubygems -e, and then in quotes, putting require, single quote JSON, semicolon, puts JSON load, and 42 in square brackets, inside single quotes, close parentheses, and inspect. What we're doing is just writing a bit of Ruby code to try it out. And sure enough, it came up and returned 42 to us. So that lets us know that JSON is working. So it was able to go out and get the JSON gem, compile it correctly using our DevKit, and we were able to then use the result of what it created for us. So we know that it's working. Those commands that I typed there at the end to test are what they recommend here in step 5. So if that changes and they recommend using something else, then you'll just want to refer to this to find out the best way to test your installation. Now that we have Ruby installed, we're ready to learn about RubyGems. RubyGems helps us to manage the different Ruby libraries that we'll be needing. RubyGems is the name of the package manager. A single Ruby gem, or just gem for short, is simply Ruby code that's been packaged up for easy distribution using RubyGems. Rails is going to make extensive use of RubyGems, so you'll become very familiar with them. And as you'll see, Rails is itself a Ruby gem. Now when we installed Ruby using the Ruby installer, it should have included RubyGems for us automatically. If for any reason that stops being true in the future, the way you get RubyGems is by going to rubygems.org. And from right there, you can see the link for installing RubyGems, and it'll take you to the download instructions. This is a good resource for RubyGems because you can find all the RubyGems, all the code libraries that have been created that can be shared with RubyGems, and they also host user guides, frequently asked questions, and things you might want to know about RubyGems. So you may want to spend some time browsing through this website once we get everything up and running. But for now, let's go ahead and just close this window, and let's go to our command prompt. And from here, we can type gem space -v. This will make sure that we have RubyGems installed and tell us what version we have. So at the moment I have 137. That's what was installed for me by the Ruby installer. Again, if you don't get that, you'll want to go to that RubyGems website and download and install it yourself. Now to use the RubyGem package manager, we type the gem command followed by whatever we want to do. So gem space list will give us a list of the gems that we currently have installed. Now don't worry about what each of these are. We're going to want to install Rails 3.0 as a gem, but first let's update our copy of RubyGems itself to make sure that we have the latest version, because I want you to know how to keep your RubyGems up to date. Gem update and then space -- system. If we type that, it'll go out to the internet, check what version we have, and make sure that it's the latest version of RubyGems. For me it was. It says nothing to update. But for you it might have needed to make a slight update. Definitely don't worry if you don't have the same version that I do. You just want to make sure you have the most recent one. We also can type gem space -- help, and we can get some help information that'll tell us information about how to use RubyGems. Again, you can also find this information on that RubyGems website. Now that we've located RubyGems and made sure it's the right version, it's going to be really easy for us to install not just Rails, but also other Ruby libraries that we can use while developing in Rails. Next, let's see how we can install Rails as a gem. In the last movie, we took a look at RubyGems, the package manager for Ruby libraries. Now that we have RubyGems installed, it will make it really simple for us to install Ruby on Rails, because Ruby on Rails is a gem. Let's go to the command line and see how. You'll want to open up command prompt if you don't already have it open. From here we can type gem space list, and RubyGems will return a list of the gems that are currently installed. If we want to install new gems, we do that with gem space install space, and then the name of the gem. So in this case, Rails. Now I'm not going to hit return just yet. If I were to hit return, it would install the latest version of Ruby on Rails and all the supporting gems that it needs. Let's talk for a moment about the different versions. You can go to the rubygems.org website, and from here you can search for Rails and then pick the Rails choice. You can see here that the current version is 4.0.0 at the time that I'm recording this. That might very well have changed by the time that you get here. If you scroll down the page, you'll see that there's a list of the different versions as well as a link to show all versions that are available, and then you can pick from that list if you want an older version. Now at the moment, the one that I want is the newest version, but that may not always be true. This training is targeted for Rails 4. It may still work fine for future versions as well, but if not, you'll want to make sure that you're installing version 4 explicitly. And we can do that from the command prompt by adding -- version and then the version that we want. So 4.0.0 will be the newest version. If small updates come out, that might end up being 4.0.3. In most cases, I would suggest first trying the latest version of version 4 and then go backwards only if you have problems. In addition to specifying the version, I'm going to add a couple of other options here. I'm going to say -- no - RI space -- no - RDoc. RI and RDoc are forms of documentation that go with the gems. We don't need these documentation files. They take a long time to generate, and they take up a lot of hard drive space. All of that information is also available online. If you decide you do want that documentation to be generated for you, you can leave these options off. But I think most developers choose to skip it, and I'm going to have you do the same. Now that we have all our options in place, let's hit return and let RubyGems go out to that RubyGems server, get the latest version of Rails and all of its companion gems, all the things that it depends on to be able to run, and bring them back and install them on our machine. It'll take a moment to complete. And once it's complete, we can see all of the gems that installed by typing gem list. If we scroll up, you'll see that there's action mailer, action packed, active model, active record, and so on. These are all parts of Rails. You can see they're all stamped with the same version number. And then if we scroll down, you can see here is the actual Rails gem itself. If we want to know what version of Rails we have, we can type Rails-V from the command line. It'll come up and it'll tell us the current version of Rails that we have installed. This also lets us know that we have Rails available to us as a command that we can type from the command line, which is going to be important. We're going to be using that when we generate our new project. Now that we have Ruby on Rails installed, we're getting close to having all the parts we need to get started. But we still need a database to store data. Let's see how to install MySQL.